So, good afternoon, room. My name is Kevin. I live in San Diego. I'm a programmer. I'm actually kind of getting bored with that. I'm switching to biology right now. I'm just curious. There's cool stuff going on. I was at Walmart last night at midnight. I'm a volunteer here. And so I was buying stuff. And then I woke up at like 7 a.m. to help somebody in the morning. So I'm really tired. I haven't even eaten today.
Did you sleep in your camper?
No, I didn't get home. But I haven't eaten, so I'm a little grumpy. But I'll try to be optimistic.
For an optimist.
All right, so what is radical optimism? A couple of key points, or ideas, premises. Life is basically good. And then the part that I'm going to spend most of my time on, most of the key metrics about life have been getting better over the last few hundred years. And I'll show all the evidence for that. I think most other problems are likely to be solved. It might take a long time, but that's kind of the approach of optimism. Things can go bad, but I think after this, I hope that a lot of you will start to put the burden of proof on the pessimist, whether it's within you or somebody else. So there's a website that has all the evidence, so you can evaluate for yourself. I did this presentation at the last Libertopia, if you want to see that. I changed this around a little bit this time because I'm going to spend some time on objections, because a lot of people have, it springs to mind a lot of problems. So speaking of that, radical optimism does not say that there aren't bad things. A lot of things suck. Hopefully that's an okay word for you.
You're good.
All right. Progress is bottlenecked on a lot of bad ideas, whether it's institutions of coercion, whatever it is. Those institutions are usually really hard to change. Sometimes we feel powerless. Some things are unsolvable right now. I mean, if a supernova exploded 1 billion years ago and it's just about to hit us, we can't do anything about that. There's entropy, which the basic idea of entropy is that all things equal in a closed system, things go towards disorder. That's a concept in physics. And some people conclude from that what's called the heat death of the universe, which can cause pessimistic thoughts. I can cover that a little bit later. So I did also change this presentation because I think optimism is starting to go mainstream. Steven Pinker is a professor of psychology at Harvard. He just published a book this year, which I have not read yet because I've been too busy. It's called Enlightenment Now. And it actually pretty much covers all of the things I'm going to be talking about. And I actually cribbed a lot of the graphs from his presentation. Bill Gates has called this his new favorite book of all time. If you want to instead of reading the book, if you want to just watch the video of all the key concepts, there's a YouTube video. Just search for Pinker Enlightenment Cato Institute. And it's an hour-long video with a lot of the graphs and him talking about it. And then I'm going to cover a lot of the critiques that Scott Aronson has made of the book about Pinker's conclusion of optimism. Scott Aronson doesn't dispute much of the data, but disputes the conclusion. So it's a great critique. So I'm going to go over the key evidence and then discuss objections, and definitely if I miss anything, we can talk about it. And then practical kind of conclusions from this. So I'm going to start with three. Well, if there are no other graphs that you remember, these are the three graphs. So number one, global life expectancy. I'm going to go through pretty quickly, but I'll quickly go over some of the slides. So this is from 1820 to the present, and the average person in the world used to have life expectancy around 20 years old, and today it's about, the world is the black line, so it's about 65. This is my older graph. There was a bad dip here in Africa. In Pinker's new graph, that has now gone back up. So, good news. So, and the reason I think this is one of the three key graphs is because life expectancy is a proxy for so many other things. I mean, it encompasses all the things that can kill us. So, there are many of those things. The second key graph is the average wealth of the person in the world. This is not just US or rich countries, it's the world. And again, from around 1820 to the present, it's gone up by about 8 times. and this is including the poorest people in the world. And then my personal theory on this, on a lot of the progress, one of the necessary conditions for this progress has been the availability of energy. So this is the amount of energy that we're using from 1850 to the present, and the total is the top graph at the top right there. And you can see it's gone up by, I guess, 100x. So this is, and you know, we could talk about, obviously, so there are negatives to certain types of energy, but as far as what is fueling our progress, that's a huge part of it. So those are the kind of the three key graphs that things are going pretty well. And then I'm going to fly through these because I want to spend a lot of time on objections. Global poverty. So this is the black line is the right y-axis. So this is the percentage of people in the world that are in extreme poverty. And since around 1800, it's gone down from about 80% to today it's about 20%. The number of calories per day per person in the world, again, not just rich countries. The world graph, I think, is right here. Again, went up from about, in the early 20th century, 2,200 calories per day to, you know, around 2,800. Another key point is this is the amount of cropland needed per person for those calories. And I'm kind of skipping a lot of the parts of this, but if anybody has questions, let me know. But this is the key graph here. This is the amount of cropland per person to get those calories. It's now going down. That's because of productivity of fertilizer and land and things. And of course, there's some negatives to fertilizer. We can talk about that. Cancer. We always hear about cancer. And I was actually shocked by these graphs because most cancer rates are going down. Now, this is age adjusted, which means that as you get older, the likelihood you get cancer is higher. But if for the same person in, let's say, 1930 and today, the chances that you could die from cancer are much lower. Better treatment, whatever. So another key thing that people worry about is overpopulation. And what this graph is showing, it's both real world data up until the present, and then projections. And the conclusion here is that we seem to be approaching replacement. So most people have 2 kids. And so, whereas before, people had more because kids would die and things like that. It's all right, this might be a bit of a dark presentation, I hope it's all right. All right, good. War deaths per capita. So this is from Pinker's book. This is for major conflicts in history, the amount of people as a proportion of population that died in those conflicts doesn't seem to be increasing. Even though, of course, World War II, World War I were terrible, as a proportion of population, they were no worse than in the past. We have some pretty good data on murder in Europe. They kept very good records. So even going all the way back to the 1300s, the decline is absolutely massive. And Pinker goes through, if you take some of the data back to prehistoric times, it was even higher. Education per person, and I'll have a better graph on this later from Pinker, but this is again from around 1820, the number of years that a person is educated. And another key effect is called the Flynn effect. There's a great movie called Idiocracy, if you all have seen it. It talks about the idea that people are getting dumber and that will cause problems. Actually, the evidence shows that average IQ has been increasing by 3 points per decade.
How long a period is that? 3 points per decade, like over this entire period?
That's been since, this is just a side point.
Yep.
I was just squeezing in.
Yep.
It's since IQ tests have been kind of formalized. It's probably last like 50, 60 years.
It's still a lot of IQ points.
Yeah, and I have a graph later that it's not just in the US. So Pinker looked at the data across the world. Yeah, it's absolutely kind of shocking in some ways.
Yeah.
Obviously, we all talked about how much we work. We're overworked. We're not. Being a farmer and basically working all day 200 years ago, now we have obviously maybe some of us work too much, but it's still relatively much less, and some people enjoy working a lot. So this is hours worked per person per year, gone down by about half. And that means more leisure time, a lot of good things.
I think one of the keys on that is that people didn't count, like now we have 2 jobs,
Right.
but being at home was a job.
Right.
24-hour job, washing
Totally.
clothes, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just on that point.
Weekends either when you were working on the farm,
Right?
because you need to maintain it 24/7.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, in the last 100 years, we've gotten refrigeration, washing machines. Yeah. Climate change is a significant concern. I'm what Ridley calls a lukewarmer. I think the world is getting warmer. The trend, so this is from the latest report from the UN. This is the real data, and these are the various model projections from the scientists. And even the report itself says that the observations are on the lower end of the model predictions. So some piece of good evidence. This is one of the most complicated graphs I've ever seen, actually, but it's kind of cool. But this is one of the most interesting graphs ever, too, for me at least. So I'll quickly explain it. So this is x-axis is latitude, so basically where in the world, and then y-axis is percent change, the one that we care about. So if something's decreasing, it's the line plot's going to be below 0. If it's above 0, it's increasing. And these are 2 different measurements of world vegetation. And in most parts of the world, the amount of vegetation has been increasing significantly. And this is largely actually due to the increase in CO2, because that's plants food they use to eat.
Well, plants are great.
Yeah. That's a good joke. That's from, if you haven't seen Idiocracy, you should watch it. Even if the climate change gets worse, I mean, unless it gets catastrophically worse, we are richer. He's one of the key graphs from before. So therefore, we have more resources to deal with that change. And this is evidence of that. Since the early 1900s, the number of deaths from extreme climate-related disasters has been going dramatically down. Pollution is obviously a concern. But again, as we get technology, we want to have clean air. We want to take stuff out of the air, and that is happening. So this is again from 1980, so pretty recent, but various concentrations. And if you're interested in other types of pollution, there's other data I try to simplify here, but a lot of things going down. There might be counter examples. I'm not an expert. Inequality is a huge thing. So this is a fascinating graph, more for a statistician probably, but again, kind of complicated, but the blue graph is decades ago, and then as we go up towards a normal distribution, that's more recent time. So it does seem that distribution of income wants to get towards a normal distribution. Now, whether that's correct or not is a philosophical question, but I think that's a reasonable way for it to go. And in that sense, it's a positive development. And then what my friend Brian over here taught me, so psychology historically has been a lot about helping people with their problems. And about a decade or 2 ago, they started focusing on, well, not just focusing, but also looking at how to help people live positive, meaningful lives. And there's been a lot of good research. It's called positive psychology. That's the subfield of psychology. I'll just quickly go through these. Increased happiness, decreased depression, less likely to die of a heart attack, tends towards better moods, persevering and successful, higher incomes, better relationships, and the one I like the most is more creative thinking. And so I'll come back to that because I think that's one of the key takeaways for why it's good to try to be optimistic, is that creative problem solving. And I think since we have the evidence that some things have been solved, that's support for that instead of just, All right, so now I'm going to switch to pinker slides. I just screenshotted. Child mortality from 1750 to the present, and we have really good data on certain countries like Sweden has been going down, and other newer countries that are just starting to progress. We have data on that. They follow similar trends. Maternal mortality, the same. It used to be really dangerous to have children for mothers. Again, kind of countries that are just starting to progress have similar patterns. Childhood deaths. It used to be a tough world for children with underdeveloped immune systems, susceptible to all kinds of problems. This is a pretty recent graph since just 2000, but again, good trends in most key things. Undernourishment. This is the percentage of people in the world that aren't getting enough calories. This is similar to a previous graph, but I added this because of the kind of newer countries following similar patterns. Famines used to be a terrible scourge of humanity. You rarely hear of them anymore. The last one, I think, was in North Korea a few decades ago. Extreme poverty. This actually is very similar to the graph I showed earlier, but shows kind of new data that's been added on. Now it's down to 10%. Even in the U.S., sometimes we hear about poverty is getting worse, or some evidence that even in the U.S. it seems to be getting better. Wars between great powers. I mean, I can go on and on. I'll try to kind of jump through these a little bit quicker. Child labor. As people get richer, they don't have to put their children in mines. So congratulations.
No promises, though.
Yeah.
Don't set any expectations.
Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know child labor wasn't a thing until I saw this graph because.
No, you.
Yeah. Homicide again. This is just more data. Earlier it was just England, but this shows some modern data as well. Homicide in the U.S. It's much safer in the U.S. since the 60s. Rape and domestic violence has been going down. Victimization of children, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, in the U.S. in recent times has been going down. A little bit of an uptick there in the green line. Roads are much safer as far as per number of miles driven. So it's still dangerous to be on the roads, but if you can reduce the amount of driving you do, that's helpful. But just more generally, the roads have been getting safer. Plane crash deaths have been absolutely, almost to zero. I think last year there were no deaths at all. I read some story, I could be wrong on that.
Talking about major airlines or even like any air, even.
I'd have to look up the data, but I'm not sure.
Anyway, getting better.
Yeah. This is an interesting one. Deaths from falls, fires, drowning, and poison. Most of them going down. The purple line is the opioid epidemic. So that one is not good. I don't know much about that one. I have no suggestions even on that one. Literacy, since around the 1400s, across the world, now we're basically at, about 80% literacy for the whole world. This was, back to your point, IQ gains across, well, first you can see it over time, and also in other countries. So, since the 30s, I guess. But it's huge. I mean, average gain of, let's say 20 points in IQ for the whole world. I mean, a lot of that's better nutrition, education, whatever it is. So again, hours of work going down. Life satisfaction is correlated with income, so as the world has been getting richer, life satisfaction has been going up. Deforestation is a big topic. This one did have a terrible kind of few decades there until there's some forces to try to reverse that in tropical forests. Oil spills. This is the number of spills, so I don't know as far as volume of oil that was spilled, but at least the number are going down, number of tanker crashes, even as the number of oil being used has been going up. This is a really fascinating one from Pickers. Despite all of this, some of this, I'm not saying everything's good, but some things are good, yet the tone of the news has been getting much more negative over time. And this is an interesting one. This is the carbon dioxide emissions per dollar of GDP spent in the world. And this is this is just kind of an observation, and there's this idea called the Kuznets curve, I think. The idea is that as you are progressing, you're going to just kind of use a lot of dirty fuels, but then as you get richer, you start to realize, well, we need to clean that up, and it tends to reverse. So you have this kind of upside down U shape of emissions. This is the number of nuclear weapons in the world. Obviously, one is going to do a lot of damage, but still, it's at least better that we're on a good trajectory. So I flew through that. Let's stop there for a minute and see if anybody has any questions just on the graphs. Go ahead.
I do. What does IQ actually measure?
I'm not an expert on that. Well, you might, if you want to speak up, feel free, but.
Yeah, I mean, generally your aptitude for academic success, and it's highly correlated with success in life, but it could probably be, I don't know, maybe at least a 20% jump of overall intelligence, maybe as much as half, just as a guess. But it's only really incredibly good at predicting like success in academics.
It's like pattern recognition is part of it, right?
Yeah.
The reason I ask is because I don't want to be that guy who's talking about like, oh, I can't believe this generation, but I'm struck at how incompetent it seems everyone is nowadays. Like people can't figure anything out in the physical world. Or am I the only person that notices?
No, I talk all the time. We have this joke about like the usual answer to something when there's a problem is incompetence. But I guess the question would be, has it gotten worse? Or, I mean, I don't know. But
I went to a friend's barbecue in San Francisco, and there were 3 PhD graduates standing around a fire pit with logs this big, holding a lighter to it, wondering why this thing's not bursting in flame. And it's like, it blew me away.
yeah.
One thing you have to ask is how much is incompetence incentivized, right? By like, okay, well, if I'm bad at this thing, then maybe somebody can come in and do it for me, right? If I outwardly project that I'm bad at these things, then maybe people will come in and take care of it for me, like the government or anything else, right? Look at all these troubles that we're having, please come help me because I can't, right? There's certain incentives that are present within society that will kind of say, hey, well, you should be acting this way, right?
I think you have a really valid point, because it seems like incompetence is being rewarded, or is being incentivized, and like, culturally, it seems like there's this push towards just not incompetence. I mean, in sitcoms, it's always like the dad figure who's the idiot, right? And there's always like this other person that comes in and saves the day, and it just seems like this is being like perpetuated.
Yeah, I agree with you. I guess my only point would be, how can we evaluate that claim with data? Can we gather some data on that? And the closest thing that I can see to that is IQ, but I agree, IQ is not a measure of life. So, yeah, so I don't know.
But you do have to realize that, like every other measure you're talking about here, there's sort of a general perception that it's all going to hell in a handbasket.
Right.
And it turns out, if you look at the data, often that's not the case. So this may be one of those things where there were fools standing around the fire a generation ago, you know, or it may be that it's those sort of very basic practical skills that are being lost or something. I don't know.
Right. I mean, I guess one counter argument could be, yeah, maybe we don't need fires on average, and so there's kind of a normative claim in there to say that we should know how to light a log, but is that necessary for the average person? I agree with you. I think knowledge about more things is better, but some people get so specialized, and that's what they need to survive, and then they just don't know the basics sometimes. But basics is kind of there might be some some assumptions in that. Of I don't know how to do a lot of things that farmers could do 100 years ago, but how much of that do I need?
Sure.
Well, I probably would if society collapsed, but hoping that doesn't happen. I try to learn some stuff. We got a barbecue a little while ago.
I think there's something to that too. Like maybe there's just the legitimate skills going irrelevant, and it's just uncomfortable for you to see that happening. Like I think, like what you're saying, like just maybe they really don't need that skill right now in the world they were raised in, and they simply didn't learn it. It's not because they're stupid; they just didn't learn it. And I'm sure there were people saying, oh, why are people all obsessed with these new things called books when they're supposed to be farming, and they've lost those skills. But those people revolutionized the world by knowing books and not knowing farming. So my position on it is more just like things are progressing. It's hard to watch. I've had the same feeling, so I'm not picking on it. But it's kind of like maybe it's really irrelevant to know how to light a log in today's world, and it's good that they've learned something modern. I don't know.
But it's a good point in the sense that if society does collapse, it's going to be a problem. Yeah.
Good to know what's flammable, though.
Good point.
I think that's true, but I'm not even talking like if society were to collapse, but it's just if something malfunctions. Like personally, it drives me nuts that the term broken has come to describe everything that does not function the way someone expects it to. You know what I mean?
Right.
Oh, my car's broken. Well, what's wrong? It's out of gas.
I need a new one.
You have to put oil in that. Oil? Oh my gosh.
Okay. No, it's a good point. Yeah. I don't know. Good answer.
How about the idea that IQ just isn't that important of a statistic? Like,
Yeah,
because how many people do we know that are incredibly smart, super high IQs, but can't grasp the idea that like socialism isn't this wonderful idea?
Yeah.
Like that happens all the time. So I just question if IQ is a great measurement.
Yeah, maybe the opposite, the more realistic movie, maybe Idiocracy is kind of looking at the wrong way. Maybe the real scary thing is the opposite, super high IQ, people making bad decisions, worse than, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things where sometimes we're just looking at the data that we have. So yeah, that's limiting. I'm going to skip some of these. Obviously one of the things, one big concerns about this is this a call to action? No, it's the opposite. It's saying that we have evidence that some things have gotten a lot better. That should give us hope, and it should be a catalyst to try to make things even better. And this is my favorite line of the whole, so I totally skipped it. All of the research that I did here started with a book by Matt Ridley called The Rational Optimist. This was 2007 or so. And it's a wonderful book. It's a bit dated now. If you want to get into it, just read Enlightenment Now probably. But one of my favorite quotes is that progress has occurred despite the chiefs, priests, and thieves, in the sense of the leaders of the world, despite all of the errors that they make and how they repress us and whatever it is. The progress has occurred despite all that. It's my favorite quote of the book. I think it's worth keeping in mind when you see terrible things around. We still have a chance to progress despite all the idiocy. So I love this quote. This is from Goclani. He wrote a book called The Improving State of the World. A lot of the graphs from this slide, from this thing came from that book. So I'll just read it really quick because I think it's kind of inspiring. So, quote, despite recklessly increasing its numbers, humanity has never been better fed, healthier, or longer lived. The average person's lifespan has more than doubled. He is better educated and wealthier. She is freer to choose her rulers and express her views. Her professional, social, and physical mobility is less likely to be circumscribed by caste, class, location, or other accidents of birth. Not only is work less physically demanding, he works fewer hours, earns more, and has more leisure time at his disposal. The proximate causes for the improvements in the human condition are the forces of technological change and economic growth, supplemented by trade in products, ideas, and technologies. And this really summarizes all the data that I went through, I think, really well. So, what are some practical takeaways from this? I love Brian Kaplan. He's an economist at GMU, and he has this thing called a beautiful bubble. What do you do with this evidence? And this is what I like to do with this evidence. And he says, why put so much distance between myself and the outside world? Because despite my legendary optimism, I find my society unacceptable. It is dreary, insipid, ugly, boring, wrong, and wicked. Trying to reform it is largely futile. As the Smiths tell us, the world won't listen. Instead, I pursue the strategy that actually works, making my small corner of the world beautiful in my eyes. I mean, again, going back to kind of evidence. Look at the evidence in your life. What can you actually do? And you can do a lot of things in your little circle. You can make a beautiful little bubble. And he has this thing called the 10 steps to a beautiful bubble. Number 1, amicably divorce your society. We're not right for each other. Number 2, unless you can do something about a problem, don't worry too much about it. This is kind of a stoic idea. Number 3, read history books instead of news. Number 4, emotionally distance yourself from toxic people. 5, stop worrying about first world problems in the sense that things could be a lot worse. I know it's kind of a cliche to say when somebody has a problem to go, well, things could be worse. But things could be really much worse. I mean, sometimes that doesn't help solve a problem, and you should find ways to solve particular problems you have, but it's good to keep that in mind. Number 6, fill your life with joy. So the first 5 are kind of cut out the negative. 6, fill it with joy. 7, make friends with those who share your likes instead of your dislikes. Number 8, search for a meaningful life. That includes meaningful work. Number 9, date people who share your values. Number 10, now that your life is in order, explore the dumb world around you, and then when you're done exploring, go back to your beautiful little world. I love Brian Kaplan. So let's see, now I want to go through objections. Okay, I kind of went a little bit over, so I'll go through these pretty quickly, but we can definitely discuss Q&A. Nuclear war, of course. Shermer calls this the number 1 concern. I probably agree. We did get through the Cold War. There were some really close calls. But there is some, I think, decent evidence that even the worst tyrants in history are rational. They are evil, but they seem to all generally be rational. There might be exceptions, unfortunately. There could be unexpected disasters. I mentioned supernova. But the more energy and wealth that we have, and technology, the more we have a chance of dealing with terrible problems. Whether, if climate change does go exponentially bad, maybe we can do carbon sequestration or whatever. The one that I'm probably most concerned about is global government, because I think when you lose the competition between governments, as terrible as it can be, when you have a single global government, you can have really tyrannical society. So that's what makes me worried. But Joe Quirk gave a talk today about seasteading. Elon Musk is going to Mars, and he knows Peter Thiel. Maybe they've been talking libertarianism. I don't know. Super intelligent AI is some now consider that the biggest concern in the world. I'm just going to say I don't really have a strong opinion. Pinker, in his book, which I haven't read, personally, is skeptical. He thinks the concept is incoherent. He has a deeper description there. I can't do it justice. World War III, of course, you know, we see some signs of potential there now. But the key thing there, obviously nuclear war would be the worst outcome. But I mean, even in the last 100 years, there have been wars. Countries don't quickly go to nuclear war. So conventional war, if we look at World War II, it was terrible. But in the big scheme of things, it didn't, you know, collapse the entire world. So yeah, unless again it goes to nuclear, that would be bad. Terrorism, obviously, it's terrible, and it has an emotional toll on people. But as far as the impact of terrorism, it's quite small in the big scheme of things. The proportion of terrorism versus simple murder, of being mugged and killed, is something like less than 1%. So if you want to be scared about real things that are likely to happen. What's that?
Like the war on terror.
Yeah, I mean, Humor has a great presentation on this terrorism caused a lot of death, but the war on terror has caused maybe 10 times more, maybe more. And of course, it's, you know, hard to do this in numbers. These are real people, but I think the key thing is not to deny that it exists or that it's terrible, but to have some perspective. And if you're going to be worried about, you know, going out on the road or some things that are existential too, but just to put things in perspective. GMO, CRISPR, Cas9, biological diseases were one of the reasons I'm switching into bio is because it's a fascinating world. We're sequencing our genome. We can use CRISPR to modify our genome. It's a exciting but potentially scary world. And the point I just make here, again, I'm not an expert in a lot of these topics, just ideas. For hundreds of years, we've been doing GMO with essentially random mutations. Many decades ago, GMO was done with simply sending radiation at crops and finding ones that a lot of the organic crops we eat today are irradiated, and they chose those certain ones. We don't know what impact the other radiation had. So it's complicated to just say GMO versus organic. Authoritarianism, of course, it's kind of like a global government potential. You know, generally it's been on decline, but yeah, of course it's a problem. Climate change, I covered some of that. So I mentioned earlier there's a blog post by Scott Aronson, a critique of Enlightenment Now. Well, a couple of points he makes is, so how can a human race that isn't, that reacts in the ways it does to what we have today, is so kind of unthankful, uninterested even sometimes, how can we be trusted to use those gifts responsibly? It's a good question, though. And actually, going to your point earlier, even a slight loss of some of the things we depend on would throw things into disarray. A lot of people don't know how to survive, and a lot of the energy that we're shipping around the world to provide to the things we need, that would collapse, and it would be terrible. So yeah, there's a lot of concerns. So I guess that's it. You'll do great. This is I just love this little dog. It's a constructive puppy graffiti. Just love that concept. So yeah, questions, objections?
About the cancer one, is that the rate of like diagnosis is going down, or the rate of dying?
Dying, it's mortality.
Okay.
Yeah. Now a lot of that was because of smoking going down. So the big, huge drop is lung cancer, and that's because of smoking. But if you look at all the other graphs, you know, breast, pancreas, colon, this is male and female. There are some that are kind of eking up a little bit. So.
You maybe said in the beginning, you did some research. This is your research, you said?
It was mostly just cribbed from other people, particularly Matt Ridley. Matt Ridley.
Oh.
He wrote a book called The Rational Optimist.
Oh.
And this is just kind of an exploration of taking that, you know, beyond that.
And then you went and looked up stuff and kind of research journals and stuff?
Yep, and it's all on the website, and if you have any questions, let me know.
Oh, what website?
It's radicaloptimism.org.
I can't remember.
Yeah, sure.
you know there's a new disease that they've recognized?
No.
It's called chemtrail cough.
Okay.
It's a new one.
All right. And do you know what impact it has?
Well, I've heard that there's a lot of everybody coughing now, so when you see a lot of coughing, it's probably because of chemtrails.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, definitely, there's certainly problems in the world, and yeah. So we need to figure out a way to solve that as best we can.
You didn't cover gun deaths, because that's a big topic that comes up. Like every time there's a mass shooting, then you get all these people piling in saying we got to ban guns because it's obviously getting worse. And it's hard to argue with them because they're just so convinced that gun deaths in the U.S. homicide rate has got to be skyrocketing. What do you have? Anything on that?
I haven't researched it too much, but the one book I read is More Guns, Less Crime by John Lott.
Yeah.
And he shows some evidence that it's the opposite of that. But I know that there's a lot of debate around that, so,
Yeah.
but I suggest starting there.
Okay.
I think even a smaller segment is that mass shooting thing, where it's the focus is on high capacity magazines and anything that speeds up fire rate and those kind of things. That's where it's absolutely everybody's just for sure.
Yeah.
It's getting worse, and I'm skeptical even there
Well,
that these kind of quote mass shootings I bet have been happening all along. But
yeah. Well, there was a guy on Joe Rogan's podcast. He was from there, right? And he went over a bunch of those statistics. It was recent also. It was Matthew Walker back in the row.
Okay. Cool.
They're all engineered. All the
Yeah.
shootings are all engineered.
Okay.
You can mention that, the radiation from the, Fukushima thing too. I thought that's like gonna have a huge impact on all of us, everyone.
Yeah, and maybe it has, I don't know. I mean, Matt probably knows a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure.
They haven't stopped it, right? It's still.
Yeah, it's still going, but
hasn't showed up in cancer death rates.
Yeah, I mean, I say look to the evidence. What does the evidence show?
I just thought that in Japan, like a lot of just babies, and that the marine life is being washed ashore. That's
Yeah,
all
I
I
can see
see
it.
so far of it.
It makes sense because it's definitely a terrible thing.
I know quite a bit about Fukushima. And they built a robot to get as close as they could to measure the radiation. They figured it would last 1,000 hours. It lasted Tannisburg,
yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Wasn't it like 10 minutes or something?
10 hours.
Okay.
And they measured it as putting out 530 sieverts an hour.
See what
But it-
Sieverts is a measure of radiation.
But again, if you imagine the impact of Fukushima on the billions of people on the planet and the entire, well-being of the human race, compare that to, say, World War II. It's hard to imagine it could even come on, register, let alone become something that could reverse this trend that seems to be strong enough to overcome World War II and other just unbelievable, catastrophes, I guess you'd say.
Right. Yeah, I guess I'd just say that if it starts to show evidence that it's going to, completely kill us, then yeah, we need to figure out a way to solve it.
Yeah.
One sievert is toxic to the human body, 3 or 4 and you're dead. And it's putting out 533 sieverts an hour. And they've been dumping about 300 tons of water from that into the ocean every day. And when the industrial accidents happened, those rods went directly into the ocean, and it's a constant assault on the entire ocean. And Dennis Watts had said, we are at the tipping point of whether we are going to survive on this planet or not.
Well, one thing I do want to add, though, they did test plenty of nuclear weapons above ground atmospheric, so I don't know
That's a good point.
how related that is, but
Well, I mean, I'd say it goes back to where did I say that point?
I don't feel so optimistic.
I mean, so number 2. I mean, if you believe that that's as big of an issue as it is, and it could be, I don't know, then unless you are going to do something about it, I would question what is the. I mean, so it's important to gain knowledge.
How about worry? you're saying?
But yeah, and it's fine to worry too. I mean, if you gain some knowledge and it looks really bad, you should worry. You should investigate it more until you either conclude something you could do or you conclude it's not enough to worry about. But I guess, yeah, number 2, I think covers what do you, I mean, yeah, either do something about it or it's going to affect you mentally.
I understand, but Dennis Watts had a protocol to remediate it and to kill them.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
I'm a nuclear engineer. The actual radioactivity released from the site of Fukushima is below background levels.
He said,
When you get very close, you're gonna.
When you get really close to something that's radioactive, yeah, it's deadly. But that doesn't get very far. None of that radiation escapes even the building it's in. There is something called radioactive material. That's material that emits radiation.
right.
Some of that has been released, but the amount released is diluted, and by the time it gets a few miles away from the site, is below background radiation. Like you get more radioactive exposure by taking a plane ride
Yeah.
than by being on site miles away from, a few miles away from Fukushima.
Well, he
But
used
just to take this up to like a higher level, I don't know the details, but one thing I would suggest is that if there is a particular worry, there's this concept called steel manning, and the idea is to try to find all of the evidence of the opposing sides. And until you can very clearly explain the other side's point of view, like, for example, to understand at the level of detail you just said, and vice versa, it's probably insufficient to be ready to act even until one can explain the other side in a detailed way, because otherwise you may not have the full picture.
You call it steel manning, like
Steel
a
manning.
straw man.
It's the opposite of straw
Instead
man.
of the straw man argument, instead of trying to, take your opponent's argument to its extreme, in ridiculum ad absurdum, you take it the other way. It's like, can I take a position on their side that bolsters their argument as much as possible and still defeat them?
Yeah, and then I'd say if you can, but that might take months of research. But once you do, then yeah, maybe I would be worried. And then yeah, if he got killed because of that, then that's then you have to be careful if you want to act. And I mean, yeah, there's no easy answers. But I think, like you said, until you can steel man, I would not even be ready to act. So.
You could eat algae though.
Yeah, I mean, you might take, if you are leaning towards a certain way while you're researching, you might want to take some precautions, but yeah, I don't know.
Would you back up one frame to that quote? There we go. Thank you.
Oh yeah, sure. I can just give you this presentation. So I think next speaker might be coming up. Oh, we got a few minutes. I'm curious, because honestly, I didn't have much time for this. I've been volunteering and stuff. But maybe next time I want to do much more actually steel manning against myself. So I want to know objections that I didn't cover.